From various points along the eastern seaboard, this is Future Forward with Steve Rosenbaum and me, his amiable sidekick, Bob Garfield. Today we take on the big, hairy, looming danger of media illiteracy, without which none of the lies, disinformation, and propaganda of the Trump era would ever even have taken hold. And we will have a very special authority on that subject, for whom we apologize in advance, because he can get so frustrated and irate on the subject, you may feel the need to back away for your own safety. And that authority is me. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Bob. I just want to thank you for coming on the show. I know you're very busy, and the fact that you're taking the time, I appreciate it.
well, you're very welcome. But, the fact is...
No. You got it right. You're supposed to say, it's good to be here. There's a rhythm to these shows, which the guest, I say, thank you.
I got it. Oh, right.
It's good to be here.
Oh, yeah. I see where you're going. Okay. Well, thank you so much. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
There you go. It's good to be had. I got this blog post in my inbox, and I read it, and I thought, who wrote this thing? And of course, it was you. And then I read it, and I'm going to be honest, it kind of went in the TRDL category for me. It was a lot of text on the screen, and so in order to consume it, I used my text-to-speech robot to read it to me.
This is more information than I would have preferred to have had, but go ahead. I'm dying to see where this goes.
And I started with a male voice that I use a lot, and that didn't feel right. And so I actually switched to a female voice.
So how was your performance?
Not as good as yours, but you're harder to pause.
Yeah, I hear that a lot.
Yeah. So let's get into it, though. So what made you kind of decide to get on this media literacy hobby horse? We're gonna unpack it a little bit, and as we get along, there'll be some twists and turns in this pod. But I want to start with the media literacy. I'm sorry. I now have to remember the phrase, which I never heard before. Paltering.
Yeah, or paltering. Yes.
Paltering.
Paltering is the dark art of using nominal facts or like molecules of facts to mislead or simply to lie. It's the thing that opposition research wizards have been doing for decades to distort the reality behind things that the opponent has done or said. So, for example, if there's some omnibus bill that has a trillion different kind of elements to it, and in that omnibus bill that everyone has to vote for because otherwise the Department of Transportation doesn't get funded, something like that, there's a line that addresses the nature of following childhood predators on the highway, and it makes it illegal without a warrant to track known predators electronically. I mean, that doesn't exist, but I'm just using it as an example, and it's because it's an illegal search and seizure issue, right? But they put it in the bill, and all the political advertising when this guy's running for re-election is voted to protect child predators from police, right? And sort of, maybe, if you squint, you can look at it that way. But of course, it's not true. Ultimately, it was just reasserting whatever it is, the Fourth Amendment, or is it the Seventh Amendment? And because it involved the use of America's roads, then it found its way into the omnibus highway bill. That's paltering, and it is something that it's dishonest for starters, but it's also you can also call it cherry picking. the fallacy of favorable enumeration, where this is what Fox and friends do all the time, and the entire great right-wing media conspiracy is to pick out convenient facts and throw out all of the other contextual facts to create an idea and make it look like they've formed an argument. Well, they haven't. They've cherry picked things that look like it might support their screed. Then there's the fallacy of favorable non-enumeration, where you say some things about somebody that make them look like they're sainted, but you leave out the parts where it turns out they're actually evil. And I used a particular example to make this point.
Would you mind if I approach you with this song? May I tell you that I watched you, how very long that I've watched you from afar. And now right here you are, so close to me.
This is a guy who was kind of a born leader, and he had a team of unbelievably loyal and faithful, true believers. And
no. We call them fans.
Fans they did something that just like 6 or 7 of them captured the attention of the entire world in a way that has continued ever since. And that's the way I described him. And but it turns out that the guy, and I said, and his eyes, and I said, Paul Newman, you think he has eyes? And Brad Pitt and all these people who Britney Spears, I don't know who all I named, who you think of as having eyes that are riveting. I said, this guy's eyes make them all seem irrelevant. Long story short, the person I'm writing about is Charles Manson. Now, none of the things that I said in this mini bio are false. In fact, they're all absolutely true. But they kind of create the wrong impression about this psychopath, murderous Svengali. And that is a classic example of the fallacy of favorable non-enumeration, or also known as paltering.
So listeners, I just want to let you know, I made a note. Going forward, we will refer to Bob on this pod as Svengali. Because that's a wonderful word that doesn't get used nearly enough.
I wish I were gollying more Svens, because I just don't have the influence that I think I really need to cultivate my cult of worldwide radical admirers. But what can you do?
So
what can you do?
So you proposed 3 levels of kind of like actionable media literacy that you think could be put to work. And I think we should go through them and pick them apart a little bit. And then I have an alternate theory of the future of media literacy that I think maybe bumps into yours a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But let's.
Sure.
I've got them in front of me.
But let me just preface it by saying, if children were taught this, maybe for just one media literacy day a year, from say 5th or 6th grade on to into university, I think that we would not have had to deal that the effect of all the propagandizing and disinformation and big lies and small lies would have been dramatically lower. That Trump could not have done what Trump did, the Republican Party as it exists now, which is also living on, feeding on, and proliferating lies. They could not achieve it. And the great right-wing media archipelago also would not have prospered to the degree it has now, because people would know how not to be tricked. And it's all about knowing how to understand what it is you're reading, where it came from, and how much credibility it has. And it's not that complicated. You don't have to be, have a master's degree in media literacy. All you have to do is follow a few basic steps when you're encountering content as to how to evaluate it. And this, of course, doesn't exist in the schools today because, it's STEM or nothing. And history and civics have been squeezed out. So never mind there. There's barely any literature read, or any teaching about intellectual curiosity and skepticism or any of the other things that you're supposed to bring to the world. So it's all math and engineering and science. So in the absence of those, and with standardized testing governing so much about schools' funding, all of this stuff has gone out the window. But you don't have to have a civics class every day. You just don't. You just need a civics day, one day a year, to go over these short lists of these 3 short elements, in my opinion.
So I'm going to there's a lot of text here. I'm going to try and get through level 1, 2, and 3 quickly. Let's just start with level 1.
Right. So
level 1 says you want to teach students to ask these questions. Where did this content come from? Who is this person or organization? Is it professional and credible? Is it allied with a political or ideological viewpoint? Have you ever heard of it? If not, have you Googled it? It's easy to make a website or a video look like a pro bono journalistic decision.
Look like a bona fide journalistic.
Like a bona fide.
Yeah.
Right. Does this URL pass the smell test? Is the news or content an outlier, or is it reported elsewhere by reputable sources? Matt Getz, looking at you. I like that. Is this headline and content designed to provoke a click and ad revenue that goes with it, or does the information have intrinsic worth? And finally, does it seem to feed, pander, or exploit or expand your worst suspicions about something? Is it too good to be true or too bad to be true? So this is, I would call level 1, be skeptical, right? Be skeptical. Do you want to color that in any way, or do you think that stands like?
Well, I mean, I just think that tells you how to read the newspaper, or to look at Facebook, or watch YouTube. Because if you understand that paltering or cherry picking or the fallacy of favorable enumeration is being perpetrated everywhere you go online, but everywhere, you begin with the basic skepticism about what you're looking at has any merit, especially because, as implied in this first list, with the digital tools available today, anybody with an iPhone can create something that looks more or less like the CBS Evening News, or more or less like the New York Times. You can't tell by the screen that this is crackpot, or Russian disinformation, or the ugliest political lies. The videos that say Hillary and Bill Clinton have a trail of 138 murders behind them for which they have never been held accountable, it looks pretty slick. It happens also to be bananas. So I think this is a pretty good place to start, because if people approached something that was passed along by their uncle on Facebook and didn't assume that because it looks all slick or that it came from their uncle, it's credible, well, we'd be way farther ahead of the game than we are now.
All right, so I'm not going to poke holes in level 1 because I've armed myself with holes to poke in a moment. But let's get through level 2 and 3 quickly, and then we'll dig into your plans. And level 2, which is, I'm going to read as quickly as I can, and it's on the screen as well for those of you watching. Do I know how credible information is gathered and the process behind credible publishing? Are subjects dictated by fat cat publishers? The answer is seldom and never ethically. Okay. Are they dictated by omnipotent editors flogging an agenda? Answer: in the mainstream media, in the so-called conservative media, often. In mainstream media, no. Do publications follow marching orders from outside party like advertisers, George Soros, the Trilateral Commission? Are those shadowy anonymous sources invented by reporters to support preferred narratives? Is there a set of standard journalistic practices for confirming facts, qualifying sources, and providing evidence? Do politically and ideologically funded and motivated players wrap themselves in audiovisual trappings of genuine news organizations? And finally, When politicians respond to criticism by furnishing factors, evidence, or reasoned counter arguments by declaring fake news, are they lying? So this is a different level. You're essentially saying, the criticism, the pushback, the both sidesism is, you would argue, is fundamentally flawed.
Well, I do make that argument, but
Yeah.
I'm further making the argument that I'm sorry, just give me a second, because I was thinking about it while you were reading.
Flawed.
I do make that argument, but I'm further making the argument is that one of the first steps in media literacy and not being suckered is knowing how, especially news organizations, operate, knowing the rules, knowing the canons, knowing the practices, knowing the protocols, because most of the lies told about the so-called lamestream media are so divorced from the reality of how journalists go about their business that if you know how journalists go about their business, you realize it's all bullshit. So, first is to be skeptical of the provenance of something that you read in, I don't know, in the Daily Caller, but also to know, how the New York Times does its job. And it isn't by inventing sources. It isn't by taking calls from George Soros to know what to do next. So, so I would say once the supply side and once the demand side of basic, fundamental, not even necessarily sophisticated knowledge about how content gets delivered to you.
All right. At level 3, are the assertions backed up or challenged by data, official records, history, or other documented evidence? Is the audience given a sense that the source's motives is the audience given the sense of the source's motives in saying what they say? Is the reporter following a herd of other reporters? Are there signs that the elements of the story are the fruit of an impartial inquiry, or do the elements seem cherry-picked? Is there evidence of bias toward controversy? Does the reporter fully contextualize statements and evidence to permit the audience to evaluate significant history and meaning? And is the reporting pointlessly speculative? Red flags are words like may, could, should, or will. So I like level 3, but I worry that it takes us in a direction you don't mean for it to.
Okay. I don't want that to happen.
Well, no, because as I look at that list of red flags, that essentially, almost everything I have fed to me, read, or consume now has a version of one of those in it, it seems to me. I mean,
and by the way, the professional, credible, mainstream media, has some flaws, some of them fatal flaws, which I spent 20 years of my career, identifying and raging against, ad infinitum. I'm not saying that the New York Times or the Associated Press or the Washington Post or Reuters or Business Insider are perfect. They're not. And there's some things that they do repeatedly that is very aggravating. Too many anonymous sources, too many stories that focus on controversy instead of substance, stories written too fast and with too little information because of competitive considerations with other news organizations. And paying too much attention to what readers want and measuring clicks, for example, instead of focusing on intrinsic significance. I mean, I literally spent 20 years, every single week for 20 years, finding those kinds of errors and criticizing them with documentation on the media. So I'm not saying that the liberal media is somehow blameless in all of this. What I am saying is there are vast gulfs of there's a vast gulf of separation between what the legitimate press does and what the scoundrels do, and you need to know about it.
So, I don't think we have enough time to answer the question, but I will tell you a story, and then I have a somewhat pointed question. So for another project I'm working on, I took on doing a deep dive into what has been, the increasing role of TikTok in the news business, and I wanted to understand how TikTok operates, and so I picked the East Palestine train derailment. Yeah, and spent a couple of hours over the last 3 or 4 days deep in East Palestine train derailment TikTok. And I have to tell you, it was fascinating. It's fascinating. And here's what was fascinating about it. First of all, there was a lot of video. Secondly, it kind of fell into 3 categories. Mainstream media content being repackaged, of which there was very little. I found really only Yahoo, BBC, and Vice News were the 3 that seemed to be, well, from my searches on TikTok. That was thing number 1. Thing number 2 was there were some organizations. There were a lot of authentic people talking about their fears and concerns and what they'd witnessed. That was incredibly compelling. And then there were a couple of organizations like BT Newsroom, and there was another one. So BT Newsroom appears to be a political activist organization with a news bent. I couldn't quite, left of center, liberal, but puzzling. I couldn't quite figure out what they were, and why they were covering East Palestine. And then there was this guy, Nick Drom, who covered it ad infinitum. Lots of video, lots of commentary. He appears to be an entrepreneur. Doesn't live there. From what I can tell, has never been there, but had taken up the cause of covering it with 30 videos. And the reason why I share this as we dig into this idea of media literacy is when I start with your level 1 and I try and hold it up to the volume of content being manufactured about this story by people who, if you say to young people, what's the source? I can't answer that question for any of these videos. And whether it's, you don't know where they are in terms of where their IP address is. Are they actually there, or are they pretending to be there? Are they just taking video off the web and repurposing it? And do they have some, I can't figure out that Nick Drom has any motive. I don't think he has a profit motive. There's no advertising per se. He doesn't have a family there I just can't figure it out. At least with BT Newsroom, I understand their politics. They're
it's an interesting example you cite because, for a couple of reasons. One is, as we go forward, TikTok in particular, or whatever succeeds it when governments succeed in shutting TikTok down, that is increasingly going to be the source of news, information, analysis, and opinion going forward. So, and you won't be able to attach it to a credible news organization that you already know, that's shorthand for, I have a reason to believe this is true, because it's all these voices you've never necessarily seen before. And, what you have to do is consume a whole shit ton of it to begin to be able to, to see patterns of truth and reliability. And you get a lot of different viewpoints, which is good. But it's also sort of contaminated because a lot of the viewpoints are coming from people with an axe to grind, and the axe may be sharp and it may be used against you. So,
the algorithm is choosing to amplify something.
Yeah, and what's it choosing to amplify? It's choosing to amplify, much like the EdgeRank Facebook algorithm, what you have shown an interest in the past, and what's going to get you excited to look at more TikToks for the next 3.5 hours. So, just the very algorithm has to make you suspect of whether you are just in a really cleverly produced feedback loop that pays no attention to truth. So that is a problem. But it's not just me saying that we have a problem. I mean, first of all, you just look at the world around you and you see how lies have overwhelmed everything. You can see how our politics have been all but destroyed, and how democracy is in jeopardy because people can't understand whether something they're reading is true. There was a Stanford study, which is so frightening. They went, from I think middle school into university, to see if people could recognize the political bent of content online, mostly tweets, maybe also some press releases. For some reason, I'm blanking on the details of the study, but they found out that overwhelmingly American students could not tell if anyone did have an axe to grind, and that they were taking whatever they read at face value as if it were handed down from Mount Sinai on tablets. That's number one.
But
number two is
wait. I want to go back to axe to grind for a second, because
yeah.
I guess what I was trying to say is maybe in the world we now live in, everyone has an axe to grind.
Right. So then you take all this information, right, and you throw it into the hopper, and maybe what comes out is some sense of context and proportion, conventional wisdom or whatever, that you, even by being fed a lot of crap, you're also simultaneously being fed a lot of legitimate points of view. And maybe what comes out at the end of the information machine is something resembling reliable. I don't know the answer to that. What I do know the answer to is that Americans do not have the capacity to do that math, to determine whether the thing that gets extruded from the TikTok hopper has any relationship to reality. Because this Stanford test included university students. In fact, it included Stanford students. It included Stanford students. And these, this is the first or second most selective university in America. 6% of the applicants get in. And the Stanford students were unable across the board to recognize the wheat from the chaff.
All right.
And
so
match that with TikTok, and what kind of trouble are we in?
Okay, so we can agree that we're in trouble of some sort. But I'm looking at it, I've come to, based on reading your article and then watching a bunch of things. So for example, there was this showdown between Russell Brand and what's his name, John Hyman, on the Bill Maher show about, and here's the thing about, and we have a little bit of a clip.
I've been on that MSNBC, mate. It was propagandist nutcrackery. Yeah. I think to sit within the castle of MSNBC throwing rocks at Fox News is ludicrous. Do you think you can improve America by determinedly and avowedly condemning Fox News without acknowledging that you're participating in the same game?
Russell Brand's certainly not a journalist or a commentator or whatever he is. He's a comedian, I guess. Bill Maher is certainly not a journalist. And so he's a provocateur. John Hyman, I don't know what John calls himself these days, but the argument
he's a journalist and pundit. He splits the difference between, I don't know how much reporting he's done lately, but he was a reporter who found his way into political punditry, right?
So Russell Brand's screed, and which is what it was essentially that trying to claim that there's anything different between Fox News and MSNBC is like he dug hard into the question of, these are both corporations, they both have ideologies, they both are profit driven, they both promote their agendas. Explain to me what the subtle distinction is. And to be fair, even Rachel Maddow, when she's presenting things as facts, is very careful to refer back to reporting from NBC, from the mothership, that she's not claiming to have made. Like she's does she call herself a commentator or a journalist? I don't think she calls herself a journalist.
No, she's a host and commentator. Yeah. But here's the thing, Steve. I heard snippets of Russell Brand's ravings, and it all sounds very familiar to me from a sort of a left wing screed against corporate media, and it's untrustworthy because it's got a profit motive and all that shit. Yeah. The only thing is, if you give me 10 minutes, I can destroy him. Because the difference between MSNBC, corporate-owned MSNBC, with a general political point of view, which is left of center, and Fox, is that Fox is a propaganda organization that does not follow any kind of journalistic protocols. It looks like a news station. It isn't. It is an opposition research outfit that uses TV graphics and presentation to pass on politically motivated lies. They have no soul. MSNBC follows the rules, with the announced understanding that they have a liberal ideology. They don't invent things. They don't they're not guilty of constant paltering and leaving out crucial facts in order to make a point. So he's just fucking wrong. He's just fucking wrong.
So the texts and the emails that came out of Fox News seem to have rattled even their fans' cages. But I guess what I would, and we're not going to get to answer this question today, but I have a feeling it won't be the last time we have this conversation. If going forward, we know that TikTok and things like it, as I watched the East Palestine individual user-generated videos, I felt like I learned something about that story that I didn't know.
Mm-hmm. And which has brought you personally in your career pretty much full circle. Because I think our audience deserves to know that you essentially 25 years ago invented user-generated content, when long before the internet, you sent video cameras to non-journalists all over the country with the instructions to tell stories. And you got the stories back and you packaged them, and you had an MTV show called Unfiltered, I believe.
But to be fair, we fact checked. I mean, the difference was that went through our journalistic filter before it went on the air. So if you said I was arrested by the police for this and this, we picked up the phone and called and made sure there was an arrest record. We actually did the work.
Yeah. But you aggregated many, many viewpoints that were outside of the realm of established media. And which completely predicted the internet. It completely predicted it, and you, because you had an organization that did follow the rules, you went through the protocols of journalism to make sure that you weren't unleashing poison into the news environment. Many or most of the actors online do not do that. They don't exercise those protocols. They're there to get clicks and to flog a political ideology. So of course you're interested in the TikTok effect. Of course you are.
Well, I'm both enamored with it and troubled by it at the same time, because the speed of publication and the speed of people commenting and retweeting and remarketing things does leave that fact checking. Let's think about this for a moment. Kind of like there isn't time for it. I mean,
no, how do you do due diligence on the 70 TikToks you've just watched? By 70 different people, of whom you know nothing. How do you do the basic due diligence? You don't have a 3-tier checklist like I provided that can do you any good, because you can't answer any of these fucking questions on a TikTok tweak from a TikTok video from a basically anonymous poster. So.
I think I have an answer to that. And maybe we'll end with I think that the word news needs to be retired. And I think there needs to be a new granular sense of, to your point, you can't even describe what John Heilman's, like, I think people that want to be journalists ought to call themselves that and be able to publish the operating principles that they work within. I think people that want to be opinion people ought to, like, there ought to be some nuance about the difference. And part of that is, particularly in cable television, you're often asked to flip a switch and be the fact-telling news reporter on set, and then go on another show and be the opinion person. And that's just that's a failure. I mean, I've seen 2 extraordinary interviews in the last week, both of them groundbreakingly important, and both done by Jon Stewart.
And then there's Maggie Haberman. I mean, to the description you just gave a moment ago, Maggie Haberman, the New York Times White House correspondent, is, her day job is to report what's going on in the White House, and her social media job is to comment on the. Yeah. And if ever that fuzzes up her role in the world of news and information, that's just classic. And yes, Jon Stewart is a comedian, is able to synthesize information and use common sense and apply ethics and morality in a way that, is, he's way better at it than Jake Tapper. I'll just say that.
Yeah, no, these 2 interviews were both extraordinary, and he was well prepared and crushingly brilliant. All right. We are out of time. There was a lot more to do in this topic. And so I think we'll continue down this road of, as opposed to fixing things in the rearview mirror, the question is, if we're going to be in this world of algorithmic, high-speed, AI-constructed information, how do we create a new framework where people say out loud, I'm a fact-checked journalist, as opposed to I'm an opinion maker. And
well, it can't be the government. We can rule that out. So algorithms? I mean, will AI determine what label we get to use?
I was at a conference 2 years ago, and the speaker on the stage said, how many people in this room identify as a journalist? And I was like, wow, I've never been asked that question. Do you identify as it was, so maybe it's self-identification of the rules of the road that you operate under. And that could be, in your profile somewhere. Anyway, all right, this was great. Bob, thank you for writing that. I'm sure that it rattled some interesting cages, and we will be back next week with something completely different.
All right, Steve.